10:30, and we're hitting the recording button. So it's unplugged. It's unplugged. I'm sorry. It's unplugged. So you might have noticed a couple of things. Wow. You might have noticed a couple of things different about the room today.
Yes.
The shul is not set up the way it normally is. Things are a little bit messy. You might have noticed I'm wearing my long, we call it kapata. The long frock is called the kapata. And we have some leftovers over here. And the reason for that is because this weekend, both Shabbos and today are on the Hasidic calendar very, very important and significant dates, known as Yotes and Chav Kislev, the 19th and the 20th day of the month of Kislev. And the reason why they're considered such important dates is because the Alter Rebbe, the first leader of the Chabad movement, whose picture is up there in the top right, and who we've quoted many times already in this course about Kabbalah, he was a great mystic and also a great scholar of Jewish law. If you look at the top shelf over there, that white set is the Code of Jewish Law written by the Alter Rebbe. So the Alter Rebbe was arrested by the Tsar's government in 1780 something. He was arrested for activities against the Tsar. And the reason that happened was because there were other Jews who were not what we call Hasidim, who opposed the Alter Rebbe and the Chabad movement and the Hasidic movement in general, and they maligned the Alter Rebbe to the Tsar's government. And one of the things they told him is that the Alter Rebbe is supporting the enemies of the Tsar. He's supporting the Ottoman Empire, the Turks. At that time, Russia was at war with the Turks, and they said the Alter Rebbe is giving monetary and emotional aid to the Turks. And the truth of the matter was, there was a kernel of truth to that claim, because at that time, Israel was under Ottoman rule. And at that time, there were many Jews living in Israel, and they struggled very strongly financially. They had a very hard time financially. There wasn't a lot of commerce in Israel at that time. And the Alter Rebbe established a charity known as Kollel Chabad. It's actually the longest running charity in Israel. Till today, it's called Kollel Chabad. And he would send money all the time, lots of money actually, way more than he was able to afford. He would raise a lot of money from his whole network, and he should send it to Israel to support the Jews of Israel in the Ottoman Empire. So the Tsar's government arrests the Alter Rebbe. So now, just to give a little context, why were there other Jews, believing Jews, who opposed the Alter Rebbe to the point that they were willing to malign him to the Tsar's government? And the hope was actually, their plan was, be arrested by the Tsar, be convicted. And what happens when you're convicted by the Tsar? Death. Exactly, that was the plan. They took him away, like the way the Chassidim tell the story. Alter was taken away in the black chariot. Everyone knew that you get into the black chariot, you don't come back. That's the way he normally went. So how is it that religious, observant, Torah Jews would do that to another Jew? How does it work? So to understand the context of that, we have to understand the context of the whole Hasidic movement in general. The founder of the Hasidic movement you've probably heard of was a man by the name of the Baal Shem Tov. Now the Baal Shem Tov, he kind of came and democratized Judaism, in a sense. At that time, there was a big gap between the scholars and the lay people, because your average person couldn't give their kids much education past the very basic ability to read Hebrew. So most Jews were able to read, let's say, a book of Psalms. They were able to pray, but most of them were not able to learn Talmud or Halacha or really, have a lifelong learning experience, because by the time you hit 9, 10 years old, you were expected to start becoming part of the labor force and help the family out, right? And Jews were very downtrodden at the time. The Baal Shem Tov was born about 20 years after Shabtai Tzvi, the cataclysm of Shabtai Tzvi. Anyone heard of Shabtai Tzvi? Shabtai Tzvi was an incredibly charismatic man who came. He was very well versed actually in Kabbalah, in the Zohar, and he convinced a lot of well-respected people that he was the Messiah. Okay? That he was the Messiah, come to redeem the Jewish people. And he convinced a lot of Jews, many, many Jews. Actually, the Jews of Holland, we were talking about Holland before, I don't remember the context, but the Jews of Holland, a lot of them actually sold all their belongings. They sold their homes and their businesses because we're going to Israel. Messiah's here. And he did a lot of crazy, wild things. For instance, he ate on Tisha B'Av. Okay? And the saddest day on the Jewish calendar is the 9th of Av, when both temples were destroyed, and Jews do not eat on Tisha B'Av. And he said that now the Messiah is here, Matir Asurim, Baruch Matir Asurim, God permits the forbidden. And he ate on Tisha B'Av. He actually married a Sefer Torah. He did a chuppah ceremony, which we're going to talk about marriage in today's class, with the Sefer Torah. He did a lot of crazy things, but he was so charismatic, people followed along with him. And eventually he was arrested by the Sultan of Turkey, and under threat of death, he converted to Islam. And when this happened, it was a catastrophe for the Jews of Europe, a catastrophe. So many of them. This was also in the wake of the Khmelnytsky massacres, the Cossack Revolution, when hundreds of thousands of Polish and Russian Jews were killed, and they had this light, they had this hope, Shabtai Tzvi, and that was extinguished. So many Jews were devastated. And the Baal Shem Tov came to kind of breathe life back into Judaism, to show that Judaism is about love, and your connection to Eibishter, your connection to God is supposed to be about love, not just awe of God, but also loving God and having joy, prayer in a meaningful, personal way, etc., etc. But there were people who opposed the Baal Shem Tov, and they actually had a valid reason initially to oppose the Baal Shem Tov, because this was within living memory of the Shabtai Tzvi disaster, and there were actually still people, they called them Sabbatians, who still followed Shabtai Tzvi after he died, and it was a kind of an insidious thing, and people were very wary of anybody who professed any allegiance or knowledge of Kabbalah. They got very scared by Kabbalah because they thought Kabbalah leads to no longer keeping the Torah, no longer keeping halacha. So when the Baal Shem Tov came to the scene, people got very stressed out. And also the Baal Shem Tov was also democratizing Judaism. That's not just for the scholars, it's for everybody. Everybody could connect to God. Like one of the things Alter Rebbe says, all God wants is a pure heart. So it doesn't matter how much knowledge you have, if you're willing to dedicate yourself to try to live a life a little bit better, God connects to you too. You don't have to be a massive Torah scholar. And who do you think that upset? Upset the Torah scholars, right? Who you're coming and you're taking away whenever somebody upsets the apple cart, people don't like it. So there was a huge opposition and backlash to the Hasidic movement. So the Alter Rebbe was arrested and he was going to be put to death. And then on the 19th and 20th days of Kislev, which is Shabbos and today, the Alter Rebbe was freed from prison. And Hasidim saw this as both a vindication, both in a secular sense by the government and also in a spiritual sense, that the Alter Rebbe was freed. There must be a sign from heaven that what the Alter Rebbe is doing is the right thing, and the spreading of Hasidus and the spreading of Kabbalah is the proper thing. And that's why we celebrate the day of the 19th and 20th of Kislev in a major way. It's actually also interesting. We forget that for most of Jewish history, most of history, human history, not just Jewish history, every government had certain sanctioned religions, correct? Even when we were in Europe and the Jews were a minority, they were persecuted, but oftentimes Judaism was considered a sanctioned religion. Let's say in Russia, they were second-class citizens, but it was sanctioned. You were not allowed to serve other religions. You had to be a Christian, a Jew, or other sanctioned religions. So these opponents of Hasidus came to the Tsar's government, and they said, this isn't Judaism, what the Alter Rebbe is doing. It's a non-sanctioned religion. And you can't just have people running around spouting all sorts of philosophies that aren't sanctioned by the government. And they actually took it seriously. And they interviewed the Alter Rebbe extensively. And they asked him a lot of questions about Chabad philosophy, what Chabad philosophy is trying to accomplish. And the Alter Rebbe wrote to them in Russian. A whole discussions back and forth. And after the fall of the Iron Curtain, after the fall of communism, a lot of these things were released by the government and actually translated. You can see that, you can look them up online, see the Alter Rebbe's personal writings. But one of the stories they say while the Alter Rebbe was in prison, we're going to just say this quick story, and then we're going to jump into the actual lesson. When the Alter Rebbe was in prison, the minister of education came to visit him in his cell to talk to the Alter Rebbe. And this minister of education, back then, to be the minister of education, you had to actually have an education, right? It's not like today where if you're somebody's kid or if you know somebody's friend, you become the minister of education. You have to have an education. And he was actually very well versed in Torah as well. So he comes to the Alter Rebbe and he tells the Alter Rebbe, I have a question for you. What is this question? We know this story in Genesis that after Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, the Torah tells us that God comes into the garden and he says, Ayeka. He asks Adam and Eve, Ayeka, where are you? Okay. So the education minister says, you Jews believe that God is omniscient. What do you mean, Ayeka? What do you mean, where are you? God, of course, God knows where Adam is. Also, there were two people alive at the time. He couldn't keep track of two people. He knew where they were. So the Alter Rebbe says what Rashi explains. Rashi, the primary commentator on the Torah, explains that when God came to speak to Adam, he didn't want to, immediately, why'd you eat the fruit? Let's start off a conversation. You don't immediately jump into the hard things. You mix a little chit-chat before you get into the hard discussion. So education minister says, I know what Rashi says. Right? This Russian, this non-Jew, says, I know what Rashi says, but I'm looking for something a little bit deeper. So the Alter Rebbe tells him that there comes a time when a person is 52 years, 10 months, and X amount of days old, which was the exact age of this education minister, that the Alter Rebbe never met before. And you come to this age, and there comes a time when God asks you, Ayeka, vu bistu. where are you? Where are you holding in life? What have you accomplished till now? Where are you going? What are we trying to do here? And that's what the Eibishter was asking Adam, where are you? And that's a question that God asks us every single day. Yaakov, where are you? So because today is the day of Yotzes Kislev, it's a very important day on the Hasidic calendar. I think there's nothing we could do better to celebrate that than learning some Kabbalah together in a meaningful way. Also, I would like to make a disclaimer that because it's an important day on the Hasidic calendar, we have a lot of Farbrengens. We know what a Farbrengen is? A Hasidic gathering. That's why this room is still a little tzahak, like we say in Yiddish. We finished last night at something like 1 o'clock in the morning. The past 2 nights, Friday night and last night, I think I have a combined 9 hours of sleep. So forgive me for the next 80 minutes, but we're going to power through and we're going to talk about today's class. Okay, so today's class we are calling the Infinite Light. Before we jump into today's class, I think it is very important to make a recap of the past 2 weeks. We're building a structure. When you build a structure, where do you start? You don't start at the top because it's not going to work. You got to make the foundation. You have to make sure the foundation is solid, and you're building on that foundation level to level as we go up and higher and higher. So the first class we learned about the 3 worlds of Bria, Yetzira, Asiya. Bia. Barbie, you don't have your map?
No, I haven't. Use my book.
We have on the bottom over here the worlds of Bria, Yetzira, Asiya. These are the first creations. We said these are the first things that God created that have a sense of self. They're outside of godliness in a way. They see themselves as having a self-concept. And we said, like, there's a sliding scale. There's Asiya, the world in which we live, the physical world in which it's very hard to actually see God at all. We live most of our lives not even aware that there is a God, because all we see is materiality, physicality. Then you slide up to Yetzirah, the world of formation, and Bria, and you get to more and more of a sense of bittul, meaning that they appreciate godliness and they sense godliness in a much more impactful way. We're going to talk a little bit today about what actually happens in those spiritual worlds of Bria and Yetzirah. What's going on over there? Who's living there? What's happening? And we said the parallel in human life are the levushe hanefesh, the garments of the soul, thought, speech, and action. We said that Bria is thought because it's more personal. Yetzirah is speech. The world of formation corresponds to the world of speech, the garment of speech. And finally, Asiya means action. And we said that the important thing for us to understand is that the Bria, Yetzirah, thought, speech, and action are concepts that are outside of the soul. They are not the soul itself. They are expressions of the soul. Thought is the way the soul expresses itself to itself. Speech is the way the soul expresses itself to another. And action is the way the soul expresses itself to the world at large. And another important point we made is that all these garments do not necessarily have to reflect the way you feel or the way you think. If you're feeling lousy, you can still think positively. If you're feeling jealous, you can act generously. And if you're, even if you're feeling anxious, you could still act with confidence and with generosity and kindness towards another person. And that was lesson number 1. Any questions on that before we go to the recap of lesson number 2? Beautiful and wonderful. Lesson number 2, we jumped past the created worlds and we went to the world of Atzilut. We said the world of Atzilut is godliness. It is not God, it is godliness. We gave the most central metaphor that we gave last week was that metaphor of a genius who comes into a classroom. I think we said Isaac Newton. Was it Isaac Newton? Okay. So imagine Isaac Newton coming to explain his whole universal gravitation theory to a bunch of high school students. So you have Isaac Newton's mind the way it is to itself, but he can't impart that to the students. It would not be possible. He wouldn't get anything. So what does he do? He takes a kernel of that idea and he defines it in a very limited way and he hands it over. The idea is still Newtonian. It is not something outside of Newton's thought. It's not something outside of Newton himself. It is his theory, but condensed, focused, defined. So he said the world of Atzilus is godliness defined. It is not infinite. It has a definition. We said there are the 10 sefirot, the 10 attributes of godliness, chachma bin adas, the intellectual capacities, then the emotional capacities, whatever those mean. And it is godliness, but it's godliness the way it is defined. It's channeled into these 10 distinct things. And we talked about the idea of chesed. We said, what is chesed? Chesed is just giving, without thinking about the what. If you deserve it, you don't. We're giving, we're giving, we're giving, we're giving. Gvura is the opposite of chesed. Gvura is no, I don't want to give, you don't necessarily deserve. We talked about Tiferes being a blend of the two. I think we did discuss briefly the intellectual properties, the difference between chachma bin adas, the comprehension, creativity, personalization. We talked about it briefly. We're going to talk about it again today. It's actually going to be very important for today's class. And then we talked about how this reflects itself, these 10 Sefirot, the world of Atzilus, the way it reflects itself within the human soul. That you have the soul powers, that each person contains within them the 10 soul powers. And part of our job is to identify the soul power, which is the root of your soul, the one that you reflect the best, your talents, your gifts, what makes you special, but and use that, harness it to live the best life that you could. But at the same time, recognizing that even if you have a weakness in one area, because you contain all 10 of those powers, there's no excuse, and you can access those other powers, even if it's not your quote unquote root power. Okay, that's a lot. I understand that's a lot. So we're going to take a couple of seconds. If anybody has any thoughts, something they want to chew over before we dive into today's class, the new material. Don't be shy. Man, this is, again, batting 1,000. So that's lesson 1 and 2. Lesson 1 was the blue zone. Lesson 2 was the green zone. And today we're going to go to the yellow zone. The yellow zone, you see we have that little yellow dot over here. It says Keter. Does anybody know what the word Keter means? Very good, crown. So Keter is something we're going to see right here. It sits on top of Atzilus. It sits on top of the 10 attributes. That's why it's called Keter, like a crown. It sits upon the head. It's higher even than the mind. That's what a crown represents. That's why it's called Keter by the Kabbalists. And in the human, the reflection in the soul, we see they call it Keter, pleasure and desire, or will, Ratzon, which means will. So today we're going to talk about angels. We're going to talk about marriage. We're going to talk human willpower. I was actually going to call today's class Triumph of the Will. Sure. So today we're going to talk about marriage. We're going to talk about angels. And we're going to talk about human willpower. Human willpower. I was going to call today's class Triumph of the Will, and then I remembered that sounds pretty familiar. Nobody? Nobody? Really? It was a Nazi propaganda film. It was a Nazi propaganda film. I think it won an Oscar. Yeah, but I think it won an Oscar or something. Like it was. Well, yes, okay. Yeah, it was very popular here in America in the 30s, whatever. Okay. So, angels. When you think of angels, what comes to mind? When I say angels, wings. Okay. By the way, we're going to talk about the wings. Why do angels have wings? It's also important. What does it mean to fly? We're going to, again, we have to reorient ourselves that when we're talking about spirituality, we give a lot of metaphors. So angels have wings. Angels aren't physical. So what does it mean that they have wings? Right? So wings. Anything else? What else do we know about angels? Messenger. That's actually what the word angel means, right? Malach means a messenger. Very good. Anyone else? Helper. Okay. Anybody else? No, that's actually, yes, that is true. Angels do not have free will. The only being, according to the Torah, according to the Kabbalists, the only being in all of creation that has free will is us. Capital M and man. Yes. So talking about angels, there is one of the most famous parts of the prayer, something that we say literally every single day, whether it's a weekday, Shabbat, or a festival, Yom Kippur, it doesn't matter. One of the most famous things that we say every single day is a quote from Isaiah. Isaiah was a prophet. It's actually interesting, by the way, parenthetically. If I asked you what is a prophet, how would you define prophet?
Talks about the situation, how it relates to the future.
Sees what we don't see.
Okay. So I actually like, Shalom, forgive me, I like your husband's answer better. Okay. So most people, when you ask them what's a prophet, they say somebody who sees the future. And it is true, a prophet does see the future. But the way Maimonides and the other thinkers discuss in Judaism, what is a prophet? They say they see the future, but that's kind of just an outgrowth of what a prophet is. A prophet is somebody who sees what we don't see, in the sense of they experience spirituality in an experiential way. They see, quote unquote, spirituality because they experience it in their minds a way that we can't necessarily comprehend. And as an outgrowth of this high level, occasionally they're able to see into the future. So we have a very famous vision of Isaiah. Isaiah goes upstairs and he sees what's happening upstairs. And he gives us a quote. Barbara, could you read on page 74, text 1? No worries. This is a quote that we say not almost every single day, literally every day of the year. Page 74. Text, no, read the actual text, just the text. Where it starts seraphim. Seraphim.
Oh, the seraphim stood above to serve him. 6 wings to each one, and one called to the other and exclaimed, Holy, holy, holy is the God of hosts. The entire earth is full of his glory.
So the angels say, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Svakos, Malok Ala Aretz Kavodo. We say it every single day. It's one of the highlights of the prayer. We actually say it multiple times a day, by the way. Have you guys heard this before? Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh?
Yeah.
So it's very odd for a few reasons. First of all, why are we talking about angels in the middle of our prayer? Honestly, who cares? Who cares what the angels are saying? Why does it matter to us? Second of all, just the saying Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh 3 times in a row is it's a very odd thing. We don't repeat ourselves in prayer, by the way. We very rarely repeat ourselves. And what are the wings? Like Shalom said, when you think of angels, you think of wings. In all of Western art, when they depict angels, they have these big fluffy wings. Why? Because in all the visions, this vision of Isaiah tells us they have wings. It says they have 6 wings, and the Renaissance artists don't necessarily put 6 wings. That's because it would look very weird, right? If we're being honest. Fine. So why do they have 6 wings? What's the point of the 6 wings? And also, if you noticed, how did Isaiah refer to the angels? He called them seraphim. Are you familiar with the term seraphim? So actually, in our prayer, when we say the word, when we talk about the angels in our prayers, we reference 3 different types of angels. We say ophanim, which is generally translated as wheels, by the way. Chayot, which means wild beings, and seraphim. And seraphim are considered the highest levels of angels. The word seraphim, does anybody know what the word seraph means? Soref means to burn. Seraphim means beings that are burning. Why are they called burning beings?
They light up.
What does it mean they light up? What does it mean? What does that mean? That's
Glow.
But again, it's not a physical thing, right? So they're not literally glowing. What's that supposed to be representing? It's a spiritual thing. But what is this glowing? What is this burning? What are we trying to convey? What's the prophet Isaiah trying to convey when he tells us that these angels are seraphim?
Well, light means knowledge.
We're going to talk about light, actually. We're going to talk a lot about light right now, by the way. We're going to talk about light a lot. Light is a very important concept in Kabbalah. We're going to jump into it right now, actually. Thank you for saying the word light, because we're going to talk about light today. Today's whole class is going to be about light. Last week, we talked about Atzilus, the way godliness manifests itself in the 10 attributes, right? The limited 10 defined things. Godliness, defined. Meaning that they all have limits. You have chesed, you have kindness, you have gura, you have that strength. They are not the same. Chesed is one thing, and gura is another thing. No longer infinite. Today, we're going to go past Atzilus. We're going to go higher than that. We're going to go to the infinite. So it's interesting. I've asked this before. I'm sorry.
Is that the connection to God, the burning?
Spoiler alert, yes. It's hoping for a stronger connection to God, actually, Beatrice. That's what it is. Just as a spoiler. So we're going to the infinite. How many of us have ever dipped our toe in Kabbalah before this class? I think I've asked this before. Dipped our toe in Kabbalah. Dipped. That's all I'm at. Like, I'm looking for dipped. Anyone ever hear the term or Ein Sof?
Yes.
Or Ein Sof. Could you define? Just translate the word or Ein Sof.
Light.
Has no
Light of, the light of
nothing.
Ein Sof. Ein Sof means without end. The light of the infinite. The light of the infinite. So, Beatrice, could you please read text 2, where we talk about the way this is the Kabbalist referring to the or Ein Sof, the infinite light.
Before Atzilus was emanated, and before the creations were created, a simple divine light filled all of reality. It had no aspect of beginning nor end. It was called Or Ein Sof, the infinite light.
So this is a very important terminology when we're learning Kabbalah, the or Ein Sof. It's key term 3.1. It's on the back of our maps. This idea of the infinite light, or actually probably better translated, the light of the infinite. The light of the Ein Sof, the infinite one. So what's important to remember, first of all, we're calling it the light of Ein Sof, the light of the infinite. Meaning we're not actually talking about the infinite yet. We're still not talking about God. We're talking about God emanating. We're talking about God's light. Talking about God himself, it's going to be for further discussion in later weeks. But now we're talking about the light of godliness. So why does Kabbalah refer to the infinite as light? Why do we use the metaphor of light? Well, first of all, when you see a light, you always recognize its source. You walk into a room, you can easily tell if the bulbs are LED or I don't know, what was the precursor to LED? Incandescent bulbs. They feel different because because they're different, because the source is different, the light is actually inherently different. It feels different. You go outside, you feel the sun. Tell me what's going on. No, he's not here. Yom Tov, thank you. So light, you sense the source. So when you have the light of the infinite one, the light of God, the light itself is infinite because it's God's light. So it's infinite because it is godliness. Another thing about light is that light does not exist without its source. Meaning, if you have the heat on all day, if you have the heat on all day in your house and you turn the heat off, what happens to the room? It stays warm for a while, right? It stays warm for a while. Eventually, the heat goes away. What happens if you have a light in your living room that's been on all week because your kids forget to turn the light off and you don't have a timer? What happens when you turn that light off? It's dark immediately. So once you turn off the source with light, once you turn off the source, it's gone, right?
Is God the light or the source? Or
The source. We're talking about the light now. The source is going to be further away.
Further away.
Yes,
Okay.
higher up. And again, it's also important the way Barbara said further away does it. It's not a geographic thing, right? It's deeper or it's more abstract. It's very important to remember this as often as we can. For another thing, it's raining outside, right? When the clouds go away, when the clouds leave, the effects of the cloud, the moisture is still there, right? That's very apparent. But when the sun sets, the light goes away. It doesn't stay anymore. Because that just shows the connection, how deep the connection between light and its source are. So when we call this level of godliness that's outside of Atzilus, the light of the Ein Sof, that means that's just a way to describe how tightly connected it is to God, that there is no separation between it and God. Atzilus, the 10 attributes, Barbara, you seem to be having a hard time with this.
It's not God.
It's not God. It's the light of God. It's godliness, right? It's still godliness. We're not up to God yet.
In the stars that burn out, the source of the light is gone.
That's a very good question.
Yeah, the light continues.
Yes. So
Because of space and distance?
that's because of at the speed of light, things get funky, according to Einstein. And also another thing, all metaphors, even in Kabbalah, are not perfect. Very simply, we're talking about God and infinity. There is no infinity. We're trying our best.
So it's traveling.
But
When
it
the
travels
sun
in
dies, the light is.
Right.
So that's what makes it different.
Then godliness. Yeah, of course. It's just a metaphor, but it's a limited metaphor like all other metaphors.
Light is not a source itself.
Right. Yes. It is not the source. The light is not the source. That is important to remember. The source is going to be futurist. Yes, God is the source of the light. Yeah. Okay. There you go. Beautiful. Going back to the metaphor of, let's say, the Newtonian metaphor, right? So Atzilus is what? The limited class that he gives to these 16-year-olds. And what is the light? What is the infinite light of Newton? The theory in his own head, right? Which is ungraspable. Again, it's not a perfect metaphor because is Newton's head infinite? No, it's not infinite. It's obviously very limited because we are limited by dint of being human beings. But there is this idea of trying to understand the metaphor in a way that we could. Let's see any slides here. Why are they called seraphim? Okay. So here we have on the board, Or Ein Sof, God's infinite self-projection that is intimately connected with God's essence and that transcends definition, limitation, and specific attributes. So this is not Atzilus. This is not these 10 things over here. It's just God as a projection, right? Just the light. Here's another important terminology. Shalom, could you read text 3? Here's another important terminology that we learn in the Kabbalah.
Oh, yeah. He encompasses all worlds, he fills all worlds.
So the Kabbalah, the Zohar, this is a quote from the Zohar. It says two things that seem to be contradictory. It says that God encompasses all worlds, and it says that God fills all worlds. If something's encompassing something, it's not filling it. It's two different things. When you fill something, that means you're measuring it, right? If I want to pour water into a cup, and I want to fill the cup, I have to put a specific amount of water into the cup, or the cup cannot contain it. I can't fill something unless it's limited and it's defined and it's measured. If I encompass the cup, if I throw it into the bathtub, I don't care how much water is there because it's just encompassing it. It's just all out there. So Kabbalah is telling us that God, there's two forms of God's light. Okay? Let's try to say Yiddish halt cup. There's what we call mimali kolaman, filling the worlds, and soiviv kolaman, encompassing the worlds. Mimali kolaman, filling the worlds, is atzilus and down. That at this point, godliness is defined. You could say that this is chachma, this is knowledge, this is bina, this is understanding, and this is das. This is the personalization aspect. Or this is chesed, this is kindness, this is gvura, this is strength, and it's not something else. That is memalikal amen. It's something specific and measured. 1 second, Barbara. And then you also have, but the Kabbalah tells us, there's also the soiviv kalaman. It's encompassing. It encompasses the whole world. Imagine the difference between a circle and a circle and a line. A circle and a line. A line is very defined and it's limited, a straight line. It has a beginning and it has an end. Circles don't have beginning or end. It's encompassing. So this infinite light is referred to as a circle. There's no beginning or end to a circle because it's infinite. Barbara.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with the word fill.
So Phil, okay.
So, he fills all worlds. He is in all worlds.
He's in them.
Not filling it.
But also
given.
but he's also filling them in the sense that he's giving them specific definition. That he wants, let's say, for instance, that this should be a table and not something else.
Right, but
Right?
it's really God.
Yes.
It's really God
Yes.
in there.
Yes.
The table is God.
That's according to Kabbalah.
Okay,
Yes.
that's what fills.
Yeah.
Okay, and encompasses the rest.
That it's not specific. It's not specific. It's a non-specific light.
I don't care about the encompasses. Do the fills.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So
Everyone's perfect for that. Like a sponge soaked in water in the big ocean. So the sponge is in the ocean, but it's filled with water. So it's surrounded by water and filled with water, but it's mahala and
Yeah.
It's all the same thing.
but it's two different
All the
modes.
same
It's the,
water.
it's that's why it's not it's it's the same God.
Yeah.
But it's the way God projects himself as the infinite light, or the way God puts himself within definition. It's definition and non-definition, basically. That's a good way of thinking about it. It's definition and non-definition. It's Newton coming and giving the class to these 16-year-olds, or Newton the way he thinks for himself. It's the same Newton, it's the same God, it's the same order, but they look very different. One is defined, one is much more concrete. You could put it into a box. You could easily write it down. Those kids could write down the notes and they could walk away to class with something. They could hold on to it. Newton's mind is ungraspable. You can't hold on to it because it has no edges. It has no definition. And it's not super important for today's class, but these two terminologies, on the back of our maps, term 3.2 and 3.3, we have Seviv Kalaman, encompassing all worlds. God as he transcends the emanation of Sphira and the creation, of the worlds of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. And then we have Mamale Kalaman, the way God fills all worlds, God as he emanates the Sphirot and actively creates a Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. Just maybe to help concretize this a little bit, the filling all worlds, the Memalikal Alman, is the way God operates within the rules of nature. Let's say in this physical world, an easy way to understand it is God created certain rules of nature. There is gravity. There are the rules of physics. Certain things are denser than others. And for example, we'll go to the most famous example that's brought down in Kabbalah. The ocean flows. The ocean flows. That's the way God fills all worlds. That water does not stand up on its own. Correct? Water flows. Then there's a God, the way God encompasses all worlds. The way God operates without rules, meaning miracles. When God splits the sea, God is not filling the world. He's not operating with the light that fills the world because he's breaking those rules. God doesn't care about those rules at this point because he's operating. But again, when I say he, I hope you understand that there's no he, right? We just don't have good words in English to explain it. So when God splits the ocean, splits the sea for the Jews to travel through it during the Exodus story, he's operating with the Saiv of Kalaman, that I don't care about the rules. I'm transcending the rules. Within the world, I'm going to transcend the world. That's one of the ways Kabbalah differentiates between Sovev Kalaman, encompassing all worlds, and Memalik Kalaman, God as he fills all worlds. Is this sitting well with anybody?
Yes.
Okay. Is this not sitting well with anybody?
But I'm just open up to listen.
Jane, what are we having a hard time with?
Well, how does everything, but
So how does light relate to the absolute?
Light, okay, we're actually going to talk about that in a minute. Light is higher, it's outside of Atzilut. Atzilut, we said, is the 10 defined things.
Yeah.
Remember we had on the board last week, because I can't cut out, we had the white paper with the cutout, the black cutout, that's the Sifirot. So the Sifirot Atzilut is that contraction, the black paper, which defines it, and you see the letters of Sefirot, I'm sorry. The S, the E, the F, the R, the I, and the O, and the T. Whatever. And Atzilus, I'm sorry, and so the light, the unlimited light, what they call here Keter, that's the white paper behind it, that it's undefined. It could be anything. It could be anything at this point. It has no definition. There's no, you can't hold on to it because it has no dimensions at this point. It's past those, it's past Atzilus. And we're going to see in a minute that it's vital to the operation of Atzilus. Atzilus wouldn't operate properly without this infinite light and a relation to this infinite light. We're going to get there in a second. So now that we have at least a little bit this idea of Or Ein Sof, the infinite aspect of godliness, of divinity, we could talk a little bit about the angels. First of all, why are these angels burning ones? What are they doing with their wings? And why do we even talk about them in the first place? So why are we, before we say the Shema prayer, which is supposed to be the pinnacle of our davening when we connect to God, what are we talking about the angels for? What's the point? Why is it important? To the point that not a day goes by where we don't say that. We don't say that. We say this line every single solitary day, 365 days a year. So why is it so important? So in lesson 1, and we recapped it a little bit, we talked about how there are spiritual worlds besides ours, right? There's the worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, the worlds of Biyah. What happens? Who lives there? What goes on over there? Some of the things that live there are angels. Angels live in Berea. Some of the angels live in Berea, the highest of these physical world, of these created worlds. Not physical. It's not physical. That would be right here in the smallest of these little blue circles, the Berea. And in Berea, what do they sense in Berea? They sense godliness. All they sense is godliness. They understand that I am a created entity with my own self-perception, but all that really matters is God. Like, remember that metaphor we gave of the baseball game? Where my friend brought his grandma, his mother, to the Wrigley Field, and she sees the grass. He sees the game because he understands the big picture. These angels in Berea, they see the big picture. All that matters is God, and we love God, and we're God. But because they understand that this is not God, this is only godliness. There's much more to God than the fact that He is the creator of this world. They want to go past Atzilus. They want to go past. They're stuck in Berea, but they want to get past it. They want to go higher. What is God? If I ask you to define what is God, if you say that God is creator, that's true. God is creator. That is true. But God is much more than creator. You can't define it. So if you operate in a way that you look at God and you say that God, you are creator, that's great and that's wonderful, but that's not it. That's not the whole thing. We should try to go past creator to understand God on His terms, not the way He relates to us. Most people, when we explore God, it's like, God gives me this, God gives me that. I'm looking for meaning in life, whatever it is. What can God do for me? That's the way most people see God. This is a normal experience, that when you see God, you're looking for God on your own terms. But what these angels are doing what these seraphim are saying is that I recognize that there's more to God than the way He relates to me. And I want to get there. Before I got married, one of the things that we do in our community is after you get engaged, you kind of get out of town for a little bit because it's a good idea to get out of town before your wedding, right? So I went to one of my mentors in California, and I was studying with him before I got married. And right before I left home, this is gonna be a little personal, and the battery's getting low on this thing. Okay, hopefully it survives to the end of the class. All right. So he asks me before I head back to New York, he's like, "Why are you marrying this girl? Why are you marrying this girl?" Just sitting right over there. So, you go on, and you say all the things that all guys say, "Why are you marrying this girl? She's beautiful, blah, blah, I like her," all these different things, right? And he's like, "That's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous thing to say. Because all you're saying is, I'm marrying her because what she can do for me, right? She makes me feel good about myself. She completes me. And she's going to take care of my children," or whatever it is, whatever you say when you sit down and you write down on a paper, why am I marrying this person? Why do I want to be in a relationship with this person? But is that all you, that is true, and that's great, and that's wonderful, that's beautiful. We should appreciate that, and you should want to have that in a relationship. But is that what a marriage is supposed to be? It's supposed to be much more than that. A marriage is that I'm getting to know the person on their terms. I want to know the whole person, not that, she cooks dinner, not that she takes care of the children, not that she's my partner. That's not the point. It's to know her for her sake. So what these angels are doing, what these angels, the Seraphim, are saying is, I see that God is much more than what he's doing for me. He's much more than the capital C creator. He's much more than Atzilus. God is infinite. He's holy, holy, holy. He's beyond what we could accomplish. So they are Seraphim, they're burning up. Right? It's actually a question. They have a burning desire. They have a thirst for God. So you could ask, one second, you're living in Berea, you're living in this highest of all the spiritual worlds. All you see, all you appreciate is godliness. What are you thirsting for God for? He's right here. That's your whole, even your self-conception is that I am here because of God. So what do you, usually when you have a burning passion, it's because it's something that you can't get your hands on. That's generally when people lust after something, it's because you can't get your hands on it. So what are these angels going crazy for? What are they so thirsty for? God is right there. It's because they see that this is not all of God. God is much bigger than this. And they spend their entire existence hoping to transcend and try to get to that other space. So the reason why we mention it in our prayer, after spending, we talked last week about prayer is supposed to be a ladder, Jacob's ladder, right? Prayer is supposed to be, you start on the bottom, start on the ground, and you're supposed to try to ascend as you go. As we're ascending these levels, the prayer tells us, one second, hold on. You're getting very high, and you're getting very close to God. But we've been talking about God. If you look in the prayer, talking about God, how he's a wonderful, mighty benefactor, and he's the great creator, and he controls everything, and he's the big bad boss, right? So the prayer book's like, one second, hold on. That's not what we're supposed to be trying to connect to. We're supposed to go past that. Look at the angels, look what they do. They can appreciate that God is much more than all the things that we've said. And we can't necessarily perceive it all the time, but we should try to be akin to the angels just a little bit. And if you ever noticed, you ever been in synagogue when we say the word kadosh, 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 people lift on their heels like this? Because we're imitating the angels. They said they have the wings because they're striving higher. So we are striving higher. That's what the kadosh, kadosh, kadosh is. That, hey, I get it, bud. You've been working very, very hard and getting higher and higher and appreciating God, God and more. But you've been focusing on God, what God does for you. But like JFK said, sometimes it's about talking about God a little bit more than what he just does for you. I don't think that's what JFK said, but it's fine. I know. I had to memorize it once. Mrs. Fliegelman had to make me. I had to memorize it 1 year, or in 5th grade, I think. So that helps explain. Oh, actually, we have a text. So Jimmy, could you read text 4, please, on page 78?
The lofty angels of Berea are called seraphim, from the word to burn. Due to their flaming passion, he gazes at the king's glory. And Sovev called Alim, the state of God, the state of godliness that encompasses the whole world, which is separate and transient.
Here's another metaphor, going back to the Newtonian thing, that example that we gave. When Newton walks into the classroom after preparing this class for high school sophomores, and he gives them a small bit of his theory, so a good student who sat in the class and appreciates the class, what should be his takeaway from this class? What's his takeaway? That this is great, this is wonderful, I get it, I'll ace the test, but I want to go back to this professor and see what else he has to offer, because this is obviously not all that there is. There's much more here, and I can't even fathom how much greater this theory is going to be, but I want to go back. And hopefully when he graduates high school, he'll enroll at Oxford, wherever he taught, and we'll get to sit at the feet of Newton and get more out of Newton. Because I'm not walking home satisfied with this little morsel that you gave me, and I'll move on with the rest of my life. I want to come back and I want more. So the angels are, we perceive that God is much greater than what we have, and we want more. So it's important for us when we're praying that yes, God is great. And like they have here, there's 2 postures. Most people, this is the way most people, even believing people who are seeking God in their lives, we notice the beauty around us or searching for meaning, so that's how we find God. But much more than that is trying to connect to God as he transcends all of creation. Who, the angels? You want to know why? So we can learn from them. That's the way I understand. So we can understand, we could learn from them a little bit and be inspired by them. There are other explanations that they channel different energies. That's what it says in other places. But for the sake of our conversation, you could ask by the way, we didn't really address all of this whole entire map. God could have snapped his fingers, boom, world. But God did it in such a way, according to the Kabbalists, in order that we should be able to comprehend it even a little bit, in order to be able to hopefully have a relationship with him even a little bit. That's why God had this entire chain of devolution, and also why he patterned our psyche and our souls on the same order of devolution.
All right, so how do the Kabbalists
Know this? It's Kabbalah. It's all handed down. Revelation at Sinai. Revelation at Sinai. Yeah. Okay, they have on page 80, they have a extra feature which just talks about the 13 attributes of mercy. We're not going to get into it right now. So here's another, actually, before we jump in to the next bit of prayer, probably even more prayer than Kadosh, 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 and what it has to do with the infinite light, even more famous prayer. What is everyone doing all right? We're walking away with something beautiful. So probably the most famous Jewish prayer is Oseh Shalom. I would say is even more famous, right? Every Jewish prayer, how do we end? Every single solitary Jewish prayer, Oseh Shalom bimromav. Somebody help me out. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Every prayer ends Oseh Shalom. So you ever think about the word Oseh Shalom bimromav? You know what that means? Make peace where? Bimromav, upstairs, right? In his heavens. He should make peace here on this world. Peace in the heavens. What's going on in the heavens that God needs to make peace? Who's fighting? Who's at war in the heaven? We don't have the I think it's a Christian concept that the fallen angels and they're at war with each other. Neil Gaiman wrote a book, Good Omens, right? Anyone ever read that book? Good Omens? Good, about the angels fighting with one another. But what is God? Why are we saying God makes peace in his heavens? Who's he making peace between? Who's fighting? The God needs to step in and be referee. And what do we mean himself? We talked about last week. We said God created in the heavens, in Atzilus, in one of the divine worlds, you have chesed and you have gevura. You have kindness and you have strength. Now chesed and gevura, how could they possibly get along? They're diametrically opposed to one another. Chesed is, I'm going to give you no matter what. Have. Gevura is, if you don't earn it, no way. It's not happening. And how's it supposed to? Yes, kind of in the human, we call kindness a discipline. So how is chesed and gvura supposed to function together? They're supposed to be part of a chain together. And chesed can look at itself and say, I am God's chesed. I am God's kindness. And I am all that there is, all that's important. This is my job. I'm going to be dogmatic about it. The only thing that matters is chesed. Then you have gvura, and gvura is like, bro, hold up. It's discipline. This is God's discipline. You can't tell me I'm supposed to override God's discipline. This is God's discipline. And how are they supposed to jive? How are they supposed to gel? We actually talked about last week that we all have a blend of all these things. How does it blend? If they see themselves as I am God's chesed, blend with you, you're not the thing. You're not the truth. You're not God. I mean, scratch that. Didn't mean to say that. So let's read text 7. Lisa, could you read text 7 for us? We're on page 83. I'm sorry. We've been bouncing around.
The synthesis of the 10 spheroids, especially those that are opposites, such as chesed and gevura, is impossible through the agency of supernal light that transcends the characteristic of the spheroid. Upon sensing this supernal light, the spheroids experience mutual. They relinquish their configuration and synthesize with each other. Consider the example of two government ministers hopelessly oppose each other. And they must appear together before they can trade their name. Similarly, the opposite forces
They remain together.
Oh, you're right. They remain who they are with their preferences, but find themselves working with the opposing viewpoints which requires consensus. This is a consequence of their state of being that results from their overwhelming reputation and all other kings, majesty, whose rank by far transcends their own. Similarly, the opposite force is reflected and Kabbalah in Atzilus and simplified due to the illumination of God's infinite light.
Or Ein Sof. So this is actually interesting. When you learn a lot of Chassidus and Kabbalah, one of the most famous parables that are given are of a king. A king, a monarch. And they say that there were Chassidim who were alive during the Bolshevik Revolution. And when the Tsar and his family were wiped out, besides for Anastasia, or whatever, as the legend goes, one of the Chassidim was, he mourned a little bit. So one of his friends was like, what are you mourning for? The Tsar was, terrible to the Jews. For hundreds of years, they were terrible to the Jews. They said, he was the last real king alive. And now we lose this parable of a king in Kabbalah. Because when they talk about king in Kabbalah and Chassidus, we're talking about like an actual real monarch, not a figurehead, not a guy who they print on plates for his inauguration and just use for tourism fundraising. We're talking about a real, actual monarch. And that's a very popular, very common metaphor given to understand God in this world is to use the metaphor of a king. So this example, they say, is imagine there's two ministers who are working for the king. Let's take the minister of war and the minister of education. And the minister of finance we'll use. All right. So the minister of war, what's he advocating for? We're going to invade everybody and it's going to be great. Let's just go. We're going to spend all the money that we can, empty out the coffers. We're going to, raid and pillage. It's going to be awesome. And we're going to attack everywhere, expand the empire. It's going to be great. What does the minister of finance say? Are you out of your mind? Do you know how much bombs cost? This is crazy. We have a budget. And there's no way for them to come to a consensus because they are both on opposite teams. I am worried about the economy, and the other guy is just worried about playing with his toys and bombing people, right? So what is the only way for them to come to consensus? When the king calls them into his chambers, and he's like, guys, we actually need a plan. So what do they see? How do they react to that? They step away from themselves, and they recognize that actually, I'm a smaller part of a greater whole. And my perspective is not the only perspective, and it's not even the most important perspective. I am a bit part, I am a cog in a greater machine. And if we need to make sure this country is healthy, even if I'm the minister of finance and it's going to cost a lot of money to wage this war, maybe it is important. Because the king who stands outside of our petty squabbles, our politics, he understands the big picture. And I will subjugate myself to his greater will. So you have chesed and you have gevura. In Atzilus, you have the kindness and the discipline, and really they can't get along because they are diametrically opposed. They're very dogmatic to what they see as important, but because they can see themselves as part of a greater whole, they recognize that we could work together. There actually is peace between us. We can harmonize. We can make a blend. We could come to Tiferet. We could be the beauty, right? I think M. Shalom said last week, isn't the goal Tiferet? Isn't the goal the blend? Yes, that is true. The goal is that they should all be able to blend together, borrow from one another, and together create all of the universe. Really? Right. So this is what it means. Oseh shalom b'mromav, he who makes peace in the world, hu yaseh shalom aleinu should make peace he who makes peace in the heavens should also make peace in his world, because he is able to show everyone upstairs in the supernal realms the greater picture, and they're able to see the infinite light and what's actually important. And therefore, they're able to coexist and harmonize and work together towards a greater goal. And the same thing is true in humanity. A healthy relationship works when I'm able to step back and appreciate that there's another perspective, and therefore I'm not necessarily right. And if you're in shul, did you ever notice what we actually do when we say Oseh Shalom B'Ramav? The one who's actually reading the Kaddish, or whatever it is, what do you do physically when you say Oseh Shalom B'Ramav? You take 3 steps backwards first, actually. Take 3 steps backwards. Because I'm taking a step back, from my perspective, and I'm recognizing that maybe there's a bigger picture. That's what we're trying to manifest. That maybe there's something greater than myself, and I have to walk away from my position and recognize that there's another position. And maybe there's validity to that position. Okay? Does that work? I'm sorry?
You don't have light.
No,
What do you mean?
Well, it's not, they're not putting together, the two opinions, and they're not putting together.
The reason why the reason there's any conflict is because we can't appreciate what the other one has to say. But by the way, I do want to clarify, in certain situations, there is right and there is wrong, and you can't back down if you are actually right. That's very important, especially for today's situation. Sure.
Make absolutely no sense, but,
Jimmy, join the club.
There's a star, if the death of a star, the source of light ends, but the light continues without the source. Is that what playing with God was really saying during the Holocaust? The world was not.
I don't want to touch that right now, Jimmy.
I'm just-
He's quoting himself.
But my point is, we're in the light now, but the source of that, which is maybe the kindness, it's not there. And we're entering a certain age of darkness.
So
Speed light.
level 5,
Just going-
the class 5, you see Simtsum Harishon over here. First concealment is in 2 weeks. Jimmy, it's in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I won't be here.
It's in 2 weeks. Okay, so now we said we're going to talk about angels, we're going to talk about marriage. What does this have to do with marriage? What does the infinite light have to do with marriage? So actually yesterday in shul, I heard a joke I heard a joke because I said the joke. But there was a couple celebrating their 50th anniversary, which I believe is the golden anniversary, right? I think 50, right? Golden is 50. This year?
No,
Oh, wow, that's amazing. That's incredible. So you'll appreciate this joke. So Milty and Brenda are celebrating their golden jubilee, and one of the grandkids at this big party, they have a whole big blowout to honor grandma and grandpa's big day. One of the grandchildren goes over to the Zaidi. He says, Uncle Zaidi Milty, what's the secret to marriage? So Milty says, my secret to marriage is that there's no I in marriage. We're on the same team. There's no I. There's no I in marriage. There's no I. That we're both on the same team and we're part of a greater whole and we're all pulling the same direction and we have to get along. So the kid goes over to his Bubby and he says, Bubby Brenda, what's your secret to marriage? I don't correct my husband's spelling. So, where do we get married in Judaism? Under the chuppah. Under the chuppah. Why do we get married under the chuppah? So, there's get married under the chuppah to represent that there's something above us. There's something above us. And this actually plays out a few times in the Jewish wedding. The thing is that if we're learning Kabbalah and we're learning about the soul roots and how each of us comes from a different space in godliness, and we all have different kinds of souls, how does marriage work? Especially when you actually learn Kabbalah in different places, it says men and women, men are from Mars and women are from Venus, Kabbalistically. They have different sources within spirituality. So how is a marriage supposed to work? And on a spiritual level, not just on the physical level. On a spiritual level, how's marriage supposed to work? So we have a texter from the Alter Rebbe, whose day we're celebrating today. We're on text 8, page 85. Page 85. Answering the question, how is it possible that a bride and a groom who have opposite soul roots, how are they supposed to come together? So text 8 on page 85, the Alter Rebbe says, the bride and groom are opposites. To unite as one, they require an infusion of higher energy that shines from a degree of divinity that transcends their differences. This is the significance of leading the bride and groom under a chuppah that hovers above both of them equally and is positioned at a height above them. Corresponds to the encompassing light of Soviv Kol Amim. Remember we talked before about how you could give a metaphor for the infinite light of God as a circle, right? The circle. So the chuppah represents that circle. In order for the bride and groom to get together, the first thing we have to show them is that, hey kids, it's great. Right now you're getting along, but eventually there's going to be friction. And how are you supposed to power through that friction? How are you supposed to make sure that there's a coexistence, a harmonious coexistence? By recognizing that there's something that's higher than both of us that we're trying to achieve together. We're trying to build something that's greater than either of us individually. You sit under the chuppah because above both their heights, nobody's on the chuppah. We're under the chuppah, but we're under the chuppah together because we're both recognizing that there's a bigger picture here. If you go to a observant wedding, you notice that the bride does 7 laps around the chassid, does 7 circles around the groom, because she's trying to inspire him to look past himself. Okay? Look past yourself. She's saying, I'm coming to represent to you that we need to tap into the Or Ein Sof, get to God's infinite, and we're going to do that together. By the way, that's also, at least in Kabbalah, that's why we put the groom puts a veil on the bride's face, because it's blank. It's undefinable. It's that white light. Kabbalistically, we're talking
Oh,
about. We're talking
okay.
Kabbalistically. How does the bride actually, I'm sorry, how do you actually legally get married? What's the legal act of marriage in halacha? Do you know? The placing of that ring, the placing of the ring is the actual physical. You do, yes. But my wife wears it on Barbara. Barbara, it's been almost 10 years. You know what I'm saying? She wears it on this finger, but I put it on that finger. Yes. And it's supposed to be a simple, unadorned. It's supposed to be unadorned ring. So people who like to write the date of the anniversary, they do it after the wedding. The diamond ring is supposed to be after the wedding, because the ring itself is supposed to be simple and unadulterated, because it represents the simple. And when we say simple, we don't mean not complex. I mean simple as an undefinable aspect of godliness, the infinite, the circle that has no beginning, has no end. It's unadorned because it's just God's infinity that the two of you are trying to get together. And by the way, you ever noticed how do Jews dance? How do Jews dance? What's the most famous Jewish dance? The hora, right? What is the hora? We're all in a circle, right? We don't do conga dancing. It's not Jewish. The conga dance is not a Jewish thing, right? Because we're all about. Yeah, exactly. Line dancing. I'm sorry, Jimmy. You know, it's all supposed. It's about representing this infinity, the Or Ein Sof, the simplicity and the unadulterated light of godliness that transcends us both, and that's how we get together. And this is why, by the way, the closest mankind gets to the infinite is how? Through procreation. Through procreation, that's the closest we get to infinity, because that's the one thing that we leave to this world that ultimately can and will last forever. If you build a house, how long is this house lasting? Whatever. But your tzetzoim, your descendants, have their own descendants and have their own descendants, have their own descendants. That is the manifestation, so to speak, of the Or Ein Sof. And that's why it's so important for a marriage to be done the proper way in Judaism, and how all relationships are supposed to be done the proper way, because the power that is given to a couple is unfathomable. So we have to be very careful with it. So we have to make sure that we're doing it the right way.
So I remember going up to the chuppah after the wedding, and the woman said to me, "You go and pray now, because God is the Shekinah."
The Shekinah. Yeah, Shekinah. They actually, when I was, again, I'm going back to that gentleman who was mentoring me before my wedding, my teacher, he was basically like, the chuppah is, in a certain sense, one of the most important times of your life. Not just because you're about to embark on this journey, but because God is he's there in a way that we have a very hard time accessing otherwise. Have anyone been to a Chabad wedding before?
Yeah.
Eli, you've been to a couple, all right?
Yeah.
A few of them.
Yeah.
So we actually sing a song when the bride and the groom go down to the chuppah. It's a song that we very, very rarely sing. It's called the Alter Rebbe's Nigun. And it's like a holy song, because we just don't sing it generally, because it has to be for a very special occasion. But a wedding is considered one of the most special occasions possible, so we sing that song. So how does this actually play into a marriage? How does it play into a marriage? If a bride and a groom, a husband and a wife, can realize that the connection that the two of them have is because Or Ein Sof, the infinite, is blessing this marriage, is infused within this marriage, that's how they're able to transcend whatever limitations either of them have. And if we can become less chauvinistic about our preconceived considerations and our preconceived perspectives, that's how you build a healthy marriage, right? There's no I in marriage, right? And this is, again, the Oseh Shalom B'Merav, he who makes peace in the heavens, who Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, can make peace with us. If we can, the ultimate peace is if we can all appreciate how we're all part of one greater unit, one greater plan. And tragedy happens and discord happens when there is disharmony. Next week, we're actually going to talk about disharmony and chaos and what that means and the source of disharmony and chaos of this world. That's going to be next week's conversation, which should be a lot of fun, actually. Okay, before we jump to the next thing about the triumph of the will, we will watch a lesson video. Let's get to it. The Jewish wedding, we said, there's a physical bond, the soul bond. Love. Sorry, I really should edit these before the class, but by the way, they make an important point. Embrace your personal differences. Just because the two of you are different, you're not supposed to smooth each other's edges out, really. You're supposed to appreciate the other person's edges. and recognize that that's because they're a human being, and that's okay. And I'm here to love the entire person with their flaws. I'm not here to fix their flaws. It's not my job. We're supposed to embrace it together and grow together. It's not my job to hammer out their problems. Okay, now the lesson video.
Welcome to the third episode of the World of Kabbalah, our journey through the mystical realms of the Kabbalistic systems. In previous episodes, we discussed various worlds of independence, and the divine world of the Sefirot. The common denominator is that all worlds are finite zones. But Kabbalah also discusses a reality that transcends limitation, God's infinite light, or Ein Sof. Here's the catch. Yes, the infinite light transcends the Sefirot, but it's also crucial to their functioning. Let's look at three of the Sefirot. Chesed is the impulse to share generously, whereas Gevura is restraint and discipline. We know from our own lives that healthy living means balancing the two, which is the role of the parent, a compromising blend of Chesed and Gevura. Kabbalah discusses other Sefirot blends as well. Sefirot diagrams typically show 22 inter-Sefirot channels representing unique Sefirot blends. That process is called Hitkalalut. But this synthesis should not be taken for granted. After all, each Sephira is unidimensional. Imagine if you personified Chesed. It was the only ingredient in your DNA. Would you tolerate an opposing impulse? No. So we can easily imagine a scenario in which each Sephira has blind patriotism for its own configuration and definition, where it would be impossible for the Sefirot to collaborate. But that didn't happen. And here's a parable to explain why. Imagine a monarch who has two ministers engaged in endless arguments. The defense minister demands a formidable army, while the finance minister desires a stable economy. When summoned before the king to present a viable solution to challenges facing the nation, their reverence for the throne diminishes their rivalry, and they collaborate harmoniously. They are now able to devise a plan that strikes a delicate balance, ensuring the stability of both the treasury and the military. In a similar way, because the Sefirot sense, or Ein Sof, how God transcends the entire concept of limitation, they shed the rigidity of their characters. They are empowered to overlook their identities, to collaborate with the other Sefirot. Now, you might wonder, how does all this relate to us? Well, this concept is one of Kabbalah's keys for marital harmony. Marriage has two dimensions: the unity of bodies, the tangible relationship between husband and wife, and the unity of soul. They're invisible but powerful soul bonds. But considering that each soul is rooted in a different sefira, how do two souls unite as one? The answer is based on the collaboration of sefirot. Soul fusion works when each soul, like its root sefira, senses God's transcendence of all particular characteristics. This awareness empowers a soul to transcend its individuality and to merge with another soul. That happens as bride and groom stand side by side on the Chuppah. So to enhance a marital harmony, remind yourself, my soul was unable to unite with my spouse's soul until it sensed divine infinity. Why don't I allow that process to continue in my conscious life as well? I can embrace my own personality and views, and also try to sense what my soul already experienced, that God transcends all personalities and views. This embrace of God's transcendence empowers me to be open to additional perspectives, which will advance my collaboration, connection, and cohesion with my soulmate.
Very dramatic. By the way, I should have pointed out that if you look at the map, besides for the lines going down from like descending down on the Sefirot, there's lines between all of them as well. This is because they all connect to one another. It's like if you're doing art, right? Not that I ever have, and you have the thing you hold on your thumb. What's that called? The palette. You have the palette. So how many things do you have on the palette? It's a couple, right? How many you have? 5, 8, however many. I don't know. Somebody help me out. How many? Whatever.
Start with 3 times.
And so you have only 3 colors. And what are you doing? You start blending all of them together, and you have infinite. All the colors of the universe are right there for you because it's all dependent on the blending. The same thing is true with the Sefirot. There's only 10 of them, so to speak, but they blend together, so all of creation can exist. Or music. How many? There's 7 musical notes, right? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. And all of music comes from blending all those different notes together, because there has to be that blend in order to have the different facets.
Is 10 mystical?
Yes, very. So a 10 is a million.
10 worlds. Well, I'm just saying.
We're not doing comparative religion here. I'm not.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying I'm not.
Just saying.
Judaism says 10 is a very important number in Judaism. Yes. The 10 spheres.
That's.
Yeah.
Which is 10 worlds.
Yeah, I mean, sure. So now we're gonna go to what is infinite? What is infinity in the human soul? What represents this infinite light, the Or Ein Sof of the human soul? So if you look over here, the yellow dot they have that corresponds to the keter, the crown, is pleasure or desire. I probably would have translated it as will, but the pleasure, desire. It sits above the intellect, sits above the emotion. So now, there's some things that we could make a lot of sense when we say that will is higher than your intellect and your emotions. There's certain things that are hardwired into your soul that you want, that you desire, and you don't need to explain to yourself why you want or you desire this thing. You want love. Nobody has to explain to you why you want love. You want a safe place to live. You want life. A parent love. Why does a parent love its child? It's not a intellectual pursuit. Why I love this child. It's not because they do great in school or because they're very talented or they behave well, they clean up after the dinner. That's not why you love your child. You love your child because it's innate. It's hardwired into your soul. Correct? That is the will, the way it transcends all of your emotional and intellectual capacities because it's innate. It's part of who you are. In Hebrew, we call it the Ratzon Ha'elyon, the higher will, because it's innate. It's baked into you. You don't have to explain it to yourself. And by the way, everything that comes after that will, your intellect and your emotions, it's totally subservient to that will. You will do anything, let's say for this child, emotionally, intellectually, you'll justify everything for that child to keep that child safe and to make the child feel love. There's other, let's say the desire for a home. You'll justify however you need to, because even if it doesn't make sense right now for me to have the home, whatever it is, it's part of who I am and I can't, it's baked into me. It's a desire that's baked in. And by the way, Yiddishkeit tells us, Kabbalah tells us that that's also the will the soul has to connect with godliness. It's part of what the soul is, and nothing, it can't be changed. The soul wants to be close to godliness, but whatever. That's an innate desire. That type of desire is an innate desire. You don't have to have any free inquiry into why I want this thing. It's there, and there's nothing you can do to change it. And the intellect is going to do the bidding of that desire, right? I'm going to be able to explain why I need to work very hard to get my kid into the best school, because where's it coming from? It's coming from the will that I have to love my child. That is will the way it's higher. And it also makes us do almost anything, right? So there we could understand how that will is infinite, like how it's similar to infinity, because it changes everything about us. It dominates every aspect of our being. But there's another type of desire that also comes with calculation. For instance, I want a car. Now, when you want a car, there's a couple of factors that you think about when you want a car: affordability, style, and safety. Right? So, because I want a car, I start thinking. I intellectually want this car. I want a Prius because it gets good gas mileage, and it's pretty affordable. But let's say you find out, is this an innate desire? It's not an innate desire, because what happens if you find out that the Prius actually is not that cheap, or it has terrible crash ratings? So get another car. I don't need this car. That desire is not innate. It's a secondary desire. It's a desire that I create after I intellectually come to terms with the fact that I want said thing. I want to send my kid to Harvard. Why do I want to send my kid to Harvard? because the professors are great, and it's a great school, and he's going to get a great job afterwards. So is that an innate desire? No, because if I get new information about how it's not necessarily a safe place for Jewish kids to be on campus right now, I don't want to send my kids to Harvard. So I could change the will.
Here comes the
I'm sorry?
desire for chocolate, is that innate? So
No, it's not. But no. We're actually going to talk. We're going to kind of touch on it. We're going to touch on it a little bit. But they're both considered desire. They're both called ratzon. They're both called ratzon because they both reflect infinite. So now the question is, how does a secondary desire that I'm thinking about with my mind and developing a desire towards, how does that reflect the infinite? So just for a little background, we're going to talk about how important will is, having a desire, having a keter, how important and indomitable will is. Malka. Keter is Or Ein Sof, yes, and that reflects Ratzon in the human soul. Excuse me, I'm sorry. There's a great story. I'm sorry. Ratzon means will or desire. Yeah, Yilu Ratzon, it should be God's will. Very good. Yeah, exactly. There's a story, another story on page 15. Like last week, it's about a wagon in the mud. A lot of stories from the cinemas, the wagon in the mud, because there was a lot of mud and there were a lot of wagons, right? So the story goes that Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, was sitting. He was having a farbrengen, like we had last night here. He was sitting with his students, and they were learning, they were davening, whatever it was. And there's on the street outside, a man was passing in a wagon, and because of the thick mud, again, this is Ukraine, the mud was thick, and the road was long. The mud, the wagon gets stuck. You can read this on text 15 if you want to for yourself, but we're going to say it on the outside. So the man knocks on the window of the shul and he sees a bunch of young men in the room listening to Baal Shem Tov, and he's like, "Hey guys, can you come help me get the wagon out of the mud?" So the students have said, "We don't have the strength because the mud is deep and the wagon is heavy." So the man responds in Ukrainian, and I'm going to butcher it, but I'm going to read it out of the Yiddish, so hopefully I'll be able to say it phonetically. Moshe dan yachoje, meaning you can, but you don't want. You can, but you don't want. In other words, you have the ability, but not the will. And without the will, it's too much. What do you want from me? It's too much. I don't have the will. So afterwards, the Baal Shem Tov said that nothing is a coincidence. And the fact that we had this guy come in and tell us this Moshe dai nechosha, that you can, but you don't want, it's also a lesson for the way we're supposed to serve God, the way we're supposed to live our lives. When a Jewish child sets out to study Torah, the same is true for adults like ourselves. They may feel that we can't because we're tired, right? I told you I slept a total of 9 hours the past 2 nights. I'm tired, right? I can't.
A friend of mine once said, you can do the impossible if you really want. You can lift up a car if the kid is under it.
How many? There are news stories.
You know who that was? Ilana.
Really?
Remember Ilana?
Sure, Ilana. Yeah, for sure.
That's when we used to go
Yeah.
to.
We see it. You read the Reader's Digest. Anybody get the Reader's Digest? There's always all these stories about these mothers doing insane, literally impossible things. Like Beatrice said, lifting cars to save their baby. You ask them to go to the gym and lift 200 pounds, it's not going to happen.
Andrew, that guy right now, he made an interview about the October 7 attack. He slept 5 hours in a week. The first week, he went there since the third. He was carrying bodies all the time. He slept 5 hours the whole week.
Because he wanted. Your will can change literally everything about you. There's a cute story they say about another chassid in the old country who was being chased by a gang of thieves, and he was a pretty heavy dude, so he stuck himself in like a crack in the wall so they wouldn't be able to find him. And after they ran away, he couldn't get back out until they broke the wall down, right? Because getting in, he wanted to. Getting out, okay, he wants to, but doesn't really want to. They had to break the wall down. To do positive things, in order to change yourself as a person, we can. We have the capability. But Moshe, right? You can. You don't necessarily want. Am I pronouncing that right? Moshe dain nechoshesh. Am I close? Or it's not? Yeah, we're close. Okay, beautiful. So, this obviously doesn't apply to all things, to all wills and desires. For instance, when I was 9 years old, I wanted to be the starting small forward for the New Jersey Nets because I had a pretty good shot. I was from outside. I was okay outside, I could bang in the paint, and I was a good defender. So I'm going to play small forward for the, and I really wanted to do it, right? I played a lot of basketball, and I really wanted to do it. I am not 6'9", and I can't jump 45 inches. Okay, so I can't, no matter how much I want, I'm not playing small forward in the NBA. It's not going to happen. But when it comes to something such as, for instance, Torah study, and I want to, that this year of 5784 is going to be the year that I actually have a real relationship with Torah, and I make the Torah mine because it's my Rosh Kehilas Yaakov. It's an inheritance to every Jew. It belongs to every Jew, the Torah, right? It's not something that you have to be given. It's not something that you have to earn. It was given to you already. You were born a Jew, the Torah belongs to you. But now I'm alive for 33 years, and I want to make the Torah mine finally. And, the kids are a lot, right? You got to pay the bills, you got to work. There's all sorts of things that I have to do. And, I'm tired, right? But I can if I want. Because nothing stands in the way of will. Indomitable, right? Will is indomitable. Nothing can stop the will if you actually want. That's why will is the representation of Or Ein Sof, of infinity in our soul. Because will is the infinite power. It can change everything else about us. That if you want something, you can justify it, and you put in the work, and you can really do whatever you need to make it happen. We're kind of running out of time, so just to wrap this up. Now, if you have an innate will, there are certain things that you innately want, that's hardwired within you, and therefore, that could dominate the rest of your being because will is indomitable. But what about if I don't actually want? I want to want, right? I want to learn Torah. That's actually what I used to tell when I was in high school. I told my teacher, I want to want, right? I know that really, I want to be the type of guy that wants to sit and learn 14 hours of Talmud a day, but I'm not, right? So what am I supposed to do? Because I don't actually want to sit down and do it. So what are we supposed to do? How can we generate will? How can you generate will? So Kabbalah tells us, don't worry, man, you can generate will. How do you generate will? So last week we talked about the 3 intellectual capacities. We talked about it briefly. We don't have a ton of time, so it's going to have to be brief again. We said there's Chachma, Bina, and Das. Acronym for Chabad is Chachma, Bina, Das. Chachma, we said, is knowledge. Bina is understanding, and Das is knowing. What's the difference? So Chachma, we said, is a spark of intellectual creativity. Figure 3.1 on page 100. Chachma is that eureka moment, the flashbulb going off in the comic strip. That initial thing, there's this idea. The initial flash of understanding. Bina is a logical and analytical breakdown of an idea. I have this light bulb, I have this flash that went off, but actually conceptualizing and discussing the details and putting a breadth and a depth to this concept. That's something that you know. You know this now. You have Chachma, you have that initial flash of understanding, you have Bina, you're analyzing it, and you're getting deeper and deeper. But Das is the most important step. We talked about it a little bit last week. Das. It's the most important step. Personalization. That I take this knowledge and I make it real to me. I make it concrete to myself. Remember, we spoke about you could have a doctor who spent 9 years in medical school, and he's been a doctor advising people how to be healthy his entire life, and he smokes cigarettes. Because I know, but I don't know. I have an idea, but to me, it's an idea. It's not an actual thing. By the way, why is Das? Why is it called Das? This connection. When Adam met Eve, right? It says Adam yada as Chava. Adam knew Chava, and she got pregnant. He knew her, so she got pregnant. I mean, we don't have to be careful, right? So, because what does Das mean? Das means to connect. In general, throughout the Bible, Das, ve'yoda, he knew her, is a euphemism for a physical relationship. Because connecting to somebody is Das. Connection, Das is connection. To give an example, they have a story of a Jewish farmer in the old country, going back to the old country. And he was a very pious Jew, great guy. But like many people at the time, he was illiterate. He couldn't read or write Russian. He didn't know how to read Russian. So once a week, what he would do, he would go to the local Melamed, the local day school teacher. He'd bring all his correspondence and ask the Melamed, ask the teacher to read his correspondence to him. They would do this every single week, right? He would come with all his mail, and they would read through it. So one day, the farmer gets a letter, and it was a very important letter. It's a letter telling him about how his father had passed. That's what it said in the letter. The news was, it was a telegram that his father had died. So the Melamed reads it, is going through the letter. He reads the story about so-and-so died. This guy's father died. And the faints. Shocked that his father died. So now, who knew the information better? Who understood it better? The Malamed. He was reading it off the paper. The teacher read the paper. He was able to read it. The other guy wasn't able to read it. So why didn't the Malamed, why didn't the teacher faint? Because he knows, but he doesn't know, doesn't feel. He didn't connect to it. Das is connecting to it. We hear all sorts of atrocities around the world. The world's a scary, scary place. A lot of bad things happen to a lot of people. But if we don't connect to it, it doesn't matter to us. Why is what's happening in Israel something that keeps us up at night and something that we think about literally all day long? Because we connect to it. Because it's important to us. It's not just something that we know. It's something that we connect to. It's something that's important to us. So if you want to generate will, how do you generate will? You think about something. You think about something and recognize that it's important and try to connect to that idea. It's not an easy thing. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of mental capacity, and you have to sit down and actually connect to it. But you can. For instance, if you want to, there's actually a great exercise that we're not going to have a ton of time to do, but I think everybody should take the time to do it at home. We don't have time because we're 2.5 seconds. But when you activate your das, when you activate this connection to an idea, to a concept, and it's no longer an idea and a concept, it's something that's real, it's something that matters, it's something that's important to you, right? It's not the kids in the abstract, it's kids in the concrete, like we talked about last week. It's a real thing. Then the ratzon will follow. Then the will follow. And you'll be able to conquer whatever challenges you have because you understand that it's important. And because you're connecting to it, so now you actually have the will, you have the desire. And like we talked about before, desire is the expression of Ein Sof. Desire is the expression of infinity. And nothing can stand. We say all the time, by the way, it's Ein Davar Ha'omid B'fnei Haratzon. Nothing can stand in the way of will. If you want, if there's a will, there is an inheritance. I'm joking. If there's a will, there's a way. So to recap, again, I have a guarantee to have everybody out on time. But to recap, today we talked about how there's the worlds of Biyah, the created worlds. There's Atzilus, which is godliness, the way that godliness is defined, the Newtonian parable of a small idea. But then there's God that's outside of that. There's God, there's the light of God, which is infinite. And like Barbara pointed out, we're not yet talking about God. We're only talking about the light. We're not talking about we're talking about the light, not the source. But the light is inherently connected to the source. And then we applied that to our understanding of what angels are trying to do, why we talk about angels in our davening, in our prayers. What does it mean for God to make peace in heaven? How we can use that knowledge of making peace in heaven to make peace within this world and in the most important relationship we have with anybody, which is the marriage, and how the marriage is built on a foundation of trying to appreciate the Ein Sof, God's infinite, and that's how we can connect with another person and make a real connection. And then we talked about how the expression of infinity within our own psyches and souls is the idea of ratzon, the idea of will, and how will tramples over any challenges, and we can make anything happen if we want to. And we talked about in the end, if you want to generate a will towards something, that we can also connect to it intellectually and hopefully afterwards develop a will. Next week, we're going to be talking about chaos. We're going to talk about collapse. We're going to be talking about rogues and our animal soul. We didn't really touch on it. And if you've learned Kabbalah and said this before, you probably are wondering why we're not talking about the animal soul yet. The reason is because the animal soul is going to even higher place. Counterintuitively, the animal soul comes from somewhere higher than we've been discussing till now. So that's good. Yeah, that's gonna be next week's class. If you don't believe me, look in the book. By the way, before I let everybody go,